After decades apart, their unfinished story returned for answers. She thought she'd buried that chapter of her life 32 years ago, sealed it in a box she promised herself would never be opened. But when a handwritten letter arrived at her doorstep with no return address, bearing only 3 words she'd spent decades trying to forget, everything she'd built began to tremble. The letter said, "I never left." What started as a curiosity soon became an obsession, because this wasn't just any letter. It was written in his handwriting. The man she'd abandoned at the airport, the man whose last words to her were a promise she'd never let him keep. And now, somehow, impossibly, he was asking her to meet him at the exact place where their story ended. But there was something else in that envelope. Something that would force her to confront a truth she'd been running from for 3 decades. A truth that would turn everything she thought she knew about her life into a carefully constructed lie. Margaret Chen sat in her corner office on the 47th floor, surrounded by glass and steel and the evidence of a successful life. At 54, she was a senior partner at one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms. Her colleagues admired her precision, her unshakable composure, the way she could dismantle an opponent's argument with surgical elegance. What they didn't know was that every victory felt hollow. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday. Plain white envelope, no return address. Her assistant brought it up with her morning correspondence, mixed between contract negotiations and settlement offers. Margaret's hand froze the moment she saw the handwriting. 32 years, and she still recognized those letters. The way he curved his R's, the slight leftward slant of his sentences. Inside, a single page. 3 words at the top. "I never left." Below it, coordinates. A date. A time. And at the bottom, a question that made her hands shake. "Why did you leave me at the gate?" She was 22 the last time she saw Daniel Park. They'd met in college, 2 lost souls in a sea of ambition. He was an artist, she was pre-law. He painted sunsets and believed in possibility. She believed in security, in plans, in futures that could be controlled. They were wrong for each other in every logical way. And yet, she remembered the way he looked at her, like she was the only person in the room. The way he'd sketch her profile on napkins during late-night diner conversations. The way he challenged her to see the world not as a series of obstacles to overcome, but as a canvas waiting to be painted. For 2 years, they were inseparable. He softened her edges, she grounded his dreams. Friends called them the beautiful impossible, a romance that shouldn't work, but somehow did. Until graduation approached and reality crashed through their carefully constructed bubble. Daniel had been accepted to an art residency in Florence. 3 years in Italy, studying under masters, chasing the dream he'd carried since childhood. He wanted Margaret to come with him, begged her to defer law school, to take a chance, to choose love over logic. She couldn't do it. Or rather, she wouldn't do it. Margaret's parents had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities they never had. Her father worked 2 jobs. Her mother cleaned houses until her knees gave out. Law school wasn't just Margaret's dream, it was their redemption. It was the reason they'd endured. She couldn't throw that away for some romantic adventure in Europe. But she'd promised Daniel she'd think about it. Told him she'd meet him at the airport on his departure date. Just to say goodbye properly, she had said. To see him off. She never showed up. Instead, she'd sat in her apartment, paralyzed by fear and duty, while his plane took off without her. She'd ignored his calls from Italy for 3 months until they finally stopped coming. Then she'd buried herself in law school, in career building, in constructing a life that left no room for regret. She'd married Robert 5 years later, a fellow attorney, appropriate, stable, safe. They'd had a daughter, Jessica, built a beautiful home in Connecticut, looked perfect in holiday cards. The marriage lasted 12 years before the silence between them became unbearable. They divorced amicably, splitting assets and custody with the same clinical precision they brought to depositions. Jessica was 23 now, living in Los Angeles, pursuing a career in music, an irony that wasn't lost on Margaret. And now, 32 years after she'd broken both their hearts, Daniel was asking her to meet him. At the airport. The same airport. Gate C7, where his flight to Florence had departed on June 15, 1993.
Margaret's assistant knocked on her door. "Your 2 o'clock is here." She snapped back to the present, shoved the letter into her desk drawer, and straightened her blazer. That evening, she sat in her empty apartment, the letter spread on her kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. She'd Googled Daniel Park, of course. Found articles about his exhibitions. He'd become successful, his paintings selling for 6 figures at galleries across Europe and America. Found photos of him at openings, always alone. No wedding ring. The date he'd specified was 2 weeks away. She had time to ignore this, to let it fade back into the past where it belonged. She had a critical case going to trial. She had responsibilities, a reputation to protect. But that question haunted her. Why did you leave me at the gate? Because she'd never told him the real reason. She'd let him believe she'd simply chosen her career over him, that ambition had won out over love. She'd let him carry that rejection for 30 decades. The truth was so much more complicated and so much more painful. The nightmares started that week. Margaret would dream she was running through the airport, desperate to reach the gate, but the corridors kept stretching longer, the departure time ticking closer. She'd wake up gasping, her heart hammering against her ribs. During a deposition, opposing counsel asked her a routine question, and her mind went blank. Her junior associate had to step in. Afterward, the young woman asked if she was feeling all right. "I'm fine," Margaret lied. But she wasn't fine. The letter had cracked something open inside her, and the past was flooding through. She found herself driving to her parents' graves, standing in front of their headstones with questions she could no longer ask. Her father had died 10 years ago, her mother 6. They'd been so proud of her success, had lived just long enough to see her make partner, but had they been happy? Had they wanted her to sacrifice everything the way they had? 1 week before the meeting date, Margaret did something impulsive, something completely unlike her. She called in sick to work and booked a flight to Florence. She needed to understand what he'd built without her. The city was exactly as he'd described it in those early letters from Italy. Golden light on ancient stone, art bleeding from every corner, beauty so overwhelming it hurt to look at. She found the gallery that represented his work, walked through an exhibition of his latest pieces. The paintings destroyed her. They were chronological, a journey through decades, and she was in every single one. Not literally, not her face, but her presence. The colors he'd associated with her, deep amber, twilight blue, the poses he'd caught her in during stolen moments. A woman turning away, always turning away. A woman at a window, looking out but never leaving. A woman holding the pieces of something broken, unable to put it back together. 32 years of art, and she haunted every canvas. The gallery owner approached her, an elegant Italian woman in her 60s. "You see something in his work, yes? He paints the same ghost over and over. We tell him to move on, but he says she is his only subject, the one who taught him that beauty and pain cannot be separated." Margaret's voice came out strangled. Has he been alone all this time?" The woman studied her with knowing eyes. "Daniel? He has had companions, of course, but alone? Yes, always alone, because he is still painting her, no? Still trying to understand why she didn't come." Margaret fled the gallery, stumbled into a church, and wept for the first time in years. Great, gasping sobs that echoed off the ancient walls. She'd thought she was protecting herself by leaving him, thought she was being responsible, mature, practical. Instead, she'd condemned them both to decades of half-lived lives. On the flight back to New York, turbulence shook the plane. The woman next to Margaret grabbed her hand in fear. And in that moment of human connection, Margaret made a decision. She would meet him. She would finally tell him the truth. But what was the truth? That she'd been afraid? That she'd loved him too much and it terrified her? That she thought she could control life by controlling her choices, only to discover that the biggest risk was never taking any risk at all. She spent the next 3 days preparing like she would for a trial, rehearsing what she'd say, anticipating his questions, building her argument. But this wasn't a courtroom. There was no winning here, no verdict that would make things right. The night before the meeting, her daughter called from LA. "Mom, you sound different. What's going on?" Margaret surprised herself by telling Jessica everything. About Daniel, about the choice she'd made, about the letter and the impending meeting. Her daughter was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Mom, do you know why I moved to LA? Why I chose music even though you tried to talk me into something more practical?" "To rebel against me?" Margaret said, attempting humor but hearing the truth in it. "No, because I watched you win case after case and come home to an empty house. I watched you achieve everything you were supposed to want and still look sad at dinner. I didn't want that life, Mom. I wanted to actually live." The words hit like a physical blow. "I'm scared, Jessica." "Good," her daughter said softly. "That means it matters." JFK International Airport, Gate C7. The same gate, impossibly, by some quirk of fate or deliberate choice. Margaret arrived an hour early, her heart a drum against her ribs. She dressed carefully. Not a power suit, but a simple navy dress that Daniel had once said brought out the amber in her eyes. She wondered if he'd remember. Wondered if he'd even show up. Then she saw him. He was standing near the window, looking out at the runway, and for a moment she was 22 again, watching him sketch in the library while afternoon light painted gold across his concentrated face. He aged beautifully. Silver threading through his dark hair, lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter and sorrow in equal measure. He wore a worn leather jacket she didn't recognize, and held a small canvas bag. He turned, and their eyes met across the terminal. Neither of them moved. The world narrowed to just this. Two people separated by 30 feet and 32 years, connected by a thread that had never quite broken. Finally, Daniel walked toward her. Each step measured, careful, like he was afraid she might disappear. When he was close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, he stopped. "You came," he said. His voice was deeper than she remembered, weathered by time. "I almost didn't. That would have been on brand." A small smile, tinged with old hurt. The terminal bustled around them, families reuniting, travelers rushing to make connections, announcements echoing off the ceiling. But in their small circle, there was only silence and the weight of everything unsaid. "Why did you ask me here, Daniel?" He set down his bag and pulled out a folder, handed it to her without a word. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to her, all stamped and ready to mail, but none of them sent. Margaret's hands trembled as she opened the first one, dated 1994. "Dear Margaret, I'm writing from Florence, and I hate you. I hate you for making me hope. I hate you for not giving me the courtesy of a goodbye. I hate you for making me love you and then disappearing like I meant nothing." The second, 1995. "I understand now, I think. You were scared. I was asking you to give up everything, to trust me with your entire future, and that wasn't fair. But I wish you'd told me. I wish you'd given me a chance to find another way." She couldn't read them all. There were too many, and her vision was blurring with tears. But she skipped ahead to the most recent, dated just weeks ago. "Margaret, if you're reading this,
It means I finally worked up the courage to find you. I need you to know something. I never blamed you for choosing yourself. I only blamed you for not trusting me enough to be honest about why. Tomorrow I'm going back to that airport. I'm going to stand at that gate and wait, the way I should have done 32 years ago. I'm going to give you the choice again. Not to come with me, we're different people now, living different lives, but to finally tell me the truth. That's all I need, just the truth. Then I can let you go. Margaret looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't go because I was terrified. Of what? Of me? Of myself. The words came rushing out now, 3 decades of confession. You saw me, Daniel, really saw me. Not the perfect daughter, not the ambitious student, not the put-together person everyone else saw. You saw the messy, scared, confused girl underneath, and you loved her anyway. And that terrified me. Because if I went with you, if I chose that path, I'd have to become the person you believed I could be. I'd have to be brave and spontaneous and willing to fail. And I couldn't. I was too afraid of disappointing everyone. My parents, you, myself. So I chose the safe path. The one where I could hide behind achievement and never have to figure out who I really was. And did it work? His voice was gentle, without accusation. No, she laughed through her tears. I built an entire life trying to prove I made the right choice, and it's been a beautiful, hollow shell. I won, Daniel. I won everything I was supposed to want, and I've been miserable since the day I let you go. They stood there, the truth finally naked between them. Around them, people caught flights and missed connections, began journeys and ended them. But Margaret and Daniel existed outside of time, in a moment that had waited 32 years to arrive. Daniel reached into his bag again and pulled out a small painting, barely larger than a photograph. He handed it to her, and she gasped. It was a portrait of her at 22, painted from memory. But it wasn't one of his usual haunted, turning-away figures. In this painting, she was looking directly at the viewer, at him, with an expression of such vulnerable honesty it took her breath away. I painted this the night before I left for Italy. This was how I saw you when you didn't think anyone was watching. This was the woman I fell in love with. Not the perfect version you tried to show the world, but the real you. The scared, brilliant, complicated, beautiful you. Daniel, I need to tell you something. He took a deep breath. I didn't ask you here because I want to restart what we had. I asked you here because I need to move forward, and I can't do that while you're still a ghost I'm painting in my memory and my heart. I need closure, Margaret. I need to know that you're happy, or that you're at least working toward happiness. I need to know that my choosing to let you go was the right thing to do. The words hit him like cold water. Let me go? Daniel, I left you. No. He shook his head. You left me at that gate, but I spent 32 years keeping you prisoner in my art, in my memory, and my heart. I never let you go. I never moved on. I painted you into every canvas, wrote you into every letter, saw you in every woman I tried and failed to love. I trapped both of us in that moment, and I finally realized, if you had shown up that day, if you had chosen me over your career, we probably would have destroyed each other eventually. We were too young, too unformed. You needed to become who you are now, and I needed to learn that love doesn't mean holding on to someone who's trying to find themselves.
Margaret felt something inside her crack wide open. So what happens now? Now you tell me. Did you find yourself, Margaret? In all those years of winning, did you discover who you actually are? She thought about her corner office, her impressive case record, her perfect apartment, her accomplished daughter who'd chosen a different path. She thought about the woman in the painting. Vulnerable, honest, brave enough to be seen. I don't know, she admitted. I think I've been so busy being what everyone needed me to be that I forgot to ask myself what I wanted.
Then maybe, Daniel said softly, you need to go find out. He bent down and picked up his bag. Margaret's heart lurched. You're leaving? I have a plane to catch. Barcelona. I'm starting a new series, one where I paint the future instead of the past. He smiled, sad and sweet. Thank you for coming, Margaret. Thank you for finally telling me the truth. You've given me the greatest gift. You've let me forgive both of us. He started to walk away, toward the security checkpoint, and Margaret felt panic rising in her chest. This was it. The final goodbye. The real ending. And she realized she didn't want it to end. Not like this. Not again. Daniel, wait. He turned, hope flickering across his face before he could hide it. She crossed the distance between them, her heart hammering. You asked me if I found myself. I didn't. But standing here, looking at you, being honest for the first time in decades, I think maybe I finally know where to start looking. Daniel, I know you're not asking me to come with you. I know this was about closure, about moving on. But what if I asked you something? Her voice shook, but she pressed on. What if I asked you to wait? Not forever. Not for another 32 years, but to wait while I figure out who I am when I'm not afraid. To wait while I learn to be the woman in that painting, the one who's brave enough to be seen. How long? I don't know. 6 months. A year. However long it takes for me to look in the mirror and recognize myself. Daniel studied her face, seeing past the expensive dress and the polished exterior to the frightened 22-year-old still hiding underneath. What are you asking me exactly? I'm asking for a rain check. I'm asking for the chance to meet you again, not as the girl I was or the woman I pretended to be, but as whoever I actually am. And then maybe we can decide if there's a future here or if this really is goodbye. And if I say no? If I say I can't spend another year waiting for you? She forced herself to be honest. Then I'll understand. God knows I don't deserve your patience. But Daniel, 32 years ago, you asked me to take a leap of faith, and I couldn't do it. I was too scared. I'm still scared. But I'm also tired of letting fear make my choices, so I'm asking you to take a leap of faith with me. One more time. The terminal hummed with life around them. Somewhere overhead, a voice announced final boarding. Time, moving forward, indifferent to their small human drama. Daniel set down his bag. 6 months. Not a year, not 32 years, 6 months, and you meet me back here. Same gate. And you tell me who you are. And if I'm still figuring it out, then at least you'll be honest about it. He reached out and touched her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. I don't need you to be perfect, Margaret. I never did. I just need you to be real. She covered his hand with hers. I'll be here. And this time, I promise, I won't run. He smiled. A real smile, full and bright and heartbreaking in its hope. Then I'll see you in 6 months. He picked up his bag and walked toward security, but this time, when Margaret watched him go, something was different. The weight that had pressed on her chest for 3 decades had lifted. The regret that had colored every choice was finally beginning to fade. She pulled out her phone and called her assistant. Clear my schedule for tomorrow. Actually, clear the next 2 weeks. I'm taking a sabbatical. But Miss Chen, a Morrison trial will be handled by the very competent team I've been training. That's what delegation is for. She hung up before her assistant could respond, and stood there, at gate C7, watching planes take off through the massive windows, each one carrying people toward their futures, toward choices made and chances taken.
Margaret thought about her daughter in Los Angeles, chasing dreams that didn't come with guarantees. Thought about Daniel, flying to Barcelona to paint a future instead of a past. Thought about the woman she'd been at 22, so afraid of disappointing everyone that she'd disappointed herself most of all. She didn't know who she'd be in 6 months. Didn't know if she and Daniel had any real future beyond these stolen moments and painful honesty. Maybe they'd meet again and discover they were too different, too changed by the decades apart. Maybe the ghost he'd been painting was all they'd ever have. But for the first time in 32 years, Margaret Chen wasn't making decisions based on fear. She was choosing possibility over certainty, truth over perfection, life over winning. She was choosing herself, and that felt like the bravest thing she'd ever done. Epilogue. 6 months later, Gate C7. Margaret arrived with only a small carry-on bag, her law firm resignation letter signed and submitted 3 days prior. She'd sold her apartment, donated half her possessions, and said goodbye to the version of herself who needed corner offices to feel valuable. She'd spent 6 months in therapy, unpacking decades of choices made from fear instead of love. She'd started painting, badly at first, then with increasing joy. She'd volunteered at a legal aid clinic, helping people who couldn't afford her old hourly rate. She'd learned that she was funny, creative, spontaneous, kind, all the things she'd buried under ambition and achievement. She'd called Jessica every week and listened to her daughter's music and told her she was proud, not because Jessica was successful, but because she was brave. And now she stood at the gate, her heart open, her hands steady, waiting. Daniel emerged from the crowd, and his face when he saw her was everything she needed to know. "I'm here," she said simply. "I see that." He was smiling, really smiling. "So, who are you, Margaret Chen?" She thought about all the answers she could give, the safe ones, the impressive ones, the ones designed to win approval. Then she thought about the woman in the painting, looking directly at the viewer with vulnerable honesty. She said, "I'm someone who's still figuring it out, but I'm figuring it out honestly, without fear. I'm someone who makes mistakes and admits them, someone who doesn't need to win every argument or control every outcome, someone who's learning that the bravest thing I can do is ask for what I want. And what do you want?" She stepped closer, close enough to see the hope and fear and possibility in his eyes. "I want to see Barcelona. I want to watch you paint. I want to have terrible arguments and wonderful conversations. I want to wake up somewhere and not know what happens next and be okay with that. I want to finally choose love over fear." That sounds terrifying. It is. Good. Then let's be terrified together. She took his hand, and they walked through the terminal toward the security checkpoint, toward the unknown, toward the life that had been waiting for them all along. Behind them, Gate C7 stood empty, its story finally complete. But ahead of them stretched a future unwritten, unpainted, gloriously uncertain. And for the first time in 32 years, Margaret Chen wasn't afraid. Sometimes the bravest journey isn't forward. It's back to the moment where we lost ourselves, so we can finally choose who we want to become. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever wondered what if about a choice you made? Have you found the courage to revisit your past and reclaim your future?
Don't forget to press the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories about real people finding extraordinary courage in ordinary moments. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a tale of love, redemption, and the beautiful mess of being human. Because sometimes the greatest love story isn't about finding someone else. It's about finding yourself.